Hey everyone, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. I'm Kristen. I search out the true stories that involve miracles. So if that sounds good to you, we are going to go ahead and get into our story for today. Now, everyone has heard that story of, hey, every cat has 9 lives. Well, there was a man by the name of Paul Templar. He survived not once, not twice, folks, but 3 times he survived being attacked by a hippo. Sounds unbelievable, right? But it happened, and wait till you hear it. It was quite the miracle. Now, to begin with, Paul Templar, he had served many years ago in the British Army, and he did that for a few years, and then after he got out of the Army, he decided to move back to his native Zimbabwe, and he learned to just love it there. The outdoors, the animals, just the beauty of Africa, and he decided that he wanted to be a tour guide. So what he did is he went through a very hard and rigorous certification program, and he passed and he became a tour guide. He was around 27, 28 years old at this time in his life, and he had, the story said, a particular passion for photographic safaris. So he really loved doing that. And he was just living his life, doing what he loved. And then, unfortunately, that fateful day occurred. Paul describes it kind of jokingly as, quote, "Yeah, had a bad day at the office," end quote. You could say that. On Saturday, March 9th, 1996, a good friend asked Paul for a favor. He wanted to know if Paul would be able to lead a safari, a canoe safari to be exact, down the Zimbabwe River. He couldn't do it last minute. His friend had contracted malaria, so he needed somebody to take the route he was taking, or his expedition, I'm not sure what they're called, and Paul obliged. He said, "Yeah, I'd love to." Paul knew the river like the back of his hand. I mean, he knew it well. He went up and down it all the time, so this would be easy for him and he'd love it. So there would be 6 people on this particular safari. And this is how it would work. They would be using 3 canoes, and 2 clients, that's 2 people who paid money to be on the safari, 2 clients would be in front of each of the canoes, while a guide would be in back of those 2 people in each of the canoes. So there was several guides. Paul wasn't the only one. So they all got their stuff in and off they went and down the river. Everybody was chatting and laughing, taking photos. They were having the best time. And at one point during the trip down the Zimbabwe River, they ran into a pod of hippos. Well, they were a pretty far distance from them at the time they came upon them, and no one was fearful, so everyone was calm and relaxed. And the plan was just to paddle around the pod, at that safe distance. It should be a no-brainer. So Paul, his canoe went first. He paddled around, and they got around pretty fast, and it said that Paul pulled the canoe into a little channel to wait for the other canoes to catch up. Well, that's when it said the 3rd canoe, somehow, they still don't know how this happened, but it had gotten off course. So there was a planned course for this thing that they did all the time, right? And so what happened to the 3rd one, we don't know, but it started to get off course. So Paul and his canoe is waiting in the channel, kind of like, what's taking so long, And this is a quote from Paul at that time. "Suddenly, there's a big thud as I see the canoe, like the back of it, catapulted up into the air, and Evans, the guide in the back of the canoe, catapulted out of the canoe." End quote. So, as like I said, he was waiting in the channel with his two clients in their canoe. They see another canoe in the distance catapulted in the air, and the guide, his name was Evans, flying. And then he's like, And he says that as this happened, miraculously, the two clients that were in the canoe with Evans, they stayed put. They didn't fly out. Somehow, Evans was the only one that was catapulted out of the canoe. And that's when they saw Evans in the water. He was being pushed by the current towards a mama hippo and her calf. And it said that was about 490 feet or so away. So Paul yells over to another guide. Remember, there's three of them, including Paul. He yells to Ben, and he says, hey, get those two clients to safety, the ones that were still in the canoe that Evans had been in. And so Ben says, okay, I got him. I'll grab him. And Ben paddled over, he got them into his, and he paddled the clients over to this middle area in the river. And it had a big, huge rock, but it was so far up out of the river that the hippos or no one else could climb it. They would be safe on top of that big rock for the time being. So that's where Ben took the clients. Meanwhile, Paul still sees Evans being kind of pushed by the current towards this mama hippo and her calf, and he wants to try to help him. So Paul begins to try to turn around his canoe because he's still in the channel right now, and he wants to go help Evans. Now, it didn't say at this time, but I am assuming he wouldn't endanger the clients that were in his canoe. So I'm assuming that he also rowed his little canoe first over to the big rock where Ben was putting the clients, and he probably said, hey, get up there for safety. And then that's when he started paddling towards Evan. Well, he's paddling and he's paddling as fast as he can. He's inching closer and closer. And that's when Paul notices, he says, a huge bow wave coming straight for him. And he knew right away that is one of two things: a humongous hippo in the water headed towards me, or a very large crocodile. So what he does is he takes the oar, the paddle, and he begins to slap it down really hard on the water. And in doing so, he's hoping to scare off whatever this animal is that's heading his way. And it said that usually due to the percussion, the sounds and frequencies under the water when you're slapping it like that really hard with the paddle, that scares away. They think something huge is up there and they're like, okay, never mind. Usually that'll scare away whatever it is. And he says it worked. That wave thing that was coming near him stopped in its tracks. So he was like, okay, good. This is good. And at this point, it said Paul was now very close to where Evans was, but they were also now closer to Mama Hippo and her baby. Paul says, quote, I'm leaning over. It's kind of a made for Hollywood movie. Evans is reaching up. Our fingers almost touched. And then the water between us erupted. Happened so fast, I didn't see a thing. End quote. And the next thing that happens is a surreal moment. Well, a nightmare too, if you want to describe it that way. All of a sudden, as that water's erupting between him and Evans, the next thing Paul knows, he says he can feel the water. And he knows that he's in the river. He said about from the waist up. But he said something was very odd, though, because he says the lower half of his body, he was feeling warmth. He says it wasn't a dry feeling either. So it was just kind of weird. And he says that he also started to feel a lot of pressure in his lower back as he's in the water there. He said he tried to move, but he wasn't able to do so. Paul says, quote, I realized I was up to my waist down a hippo's throat. It's worth mentioning that in general, hippos, they can open their mouths up to 150 degrees. Their bite is 3 times stronger than a lion's. And many sources state that around 500 people a year die from hippo attacks. Paul figured, looking back He's like, I'd known, or figured anyway, that I was so far down that hippo's throat that it was very uncomfortable for it. Because what happened next, the hippo actually spits Paul out. Paul says as his body burst through the water, because he had been trying to get away and he couldn't move. So I guess the forcefulness of this, hippo spitting him out, he swallows a little bit of water, so he's able to take a big gasping breath, and then he yells at Evans, who he sees right near him, Evans, the other guide, and he says, "We gotta get out of here now." However, Evans was in trouble. Now, I couldn't find sources that stated what kind of trouble. I don't know if he was having trouble swimming or if he was under the water. So Paul notices this, that he's in trouble, so he tries to start swimming towards Evan, who isn't that far away at all at this point. And as he's swimming back to Evans, wham, he gets hit again by a hippo. Not just gets hit sideways, but from up underneath. So once again, Paul finds himself down the hippo's throat. Now, this time his hands were free right now, so he begins to try to reach down to his holster to unclip his .357 revolver. But due to the hippo just fighting and thrashing, he couldn't get a hold of it. And it turns out the actual hippo that's attacking him is an aggressive male. So it wasn't the mama hippo. It was an aggressive male, probably, I don't know, protecting his family or himself. I'm not sure, but he was a mad one. So as Paul's fighting for that gun and they're all thrashing about, the hippo spits him out for a second time. This time, when Paul resurfaces from being spit out, he doesn't see Evans anywhere. And right off the bat, he assumes that, Evans was rescued. Okay, that's good. So Paul begins to flee and escape the area. Well, Paul's swimming as fast as he can to get away from there. And, he's occasionally looking back. I would be too. I'd be terrified, my goodness. But anyway, he's swimming fast, looking back, and doing this for, I'm not sure how long, probably not too long. And I say that because as he's doing that, swimming, he says that up under his arm, he sees a hippo and it's charging towards him. So I guess the hippo was in the water coming up near the surface where Paul was not thrashing, but swimming. So it's coming up under one of his arms. And sure enough, he didn't even have time to do anything because it is the hippo charging fast. And next thing he knows, Paul finds himself in the mouth of the hippo. But this time, not standing with waist down in his throat, he's sideways, his body. So on one side of the hippo's mouth is Paul's legs kind of dangling out one side. And then the rest of Paul, arms and head and whatnot, dangling out the other side of the hippo's mouth. And that's when the hippo goes berserk. Absolute wild. Because you see, when hippos fight, like each other or, anything, they go berserk. They try to tear apart whatever they're fighting. I mean, rip them straight. But think of that bite. It's 3 times stronger than a lion's. Ugh. This is happening as Paul is in its mouth. Paul says, quote, "For me, fortunately, everything was happening in slow motion. So when he'd go underwater, I'd hold my breath. When we were on the surface, I would take a deep breath, and I would try to hold on to tusks that were boring through me," end quote. And one of the clients, they're watching from the rock in the middle of the river, they described it as a vicious dog attack. That's what it looked like to them. And the whole attack itself lasted 3.5 minutes, which I bet that felt like more like 3.5 hours. Poor Paul. So there happened to be an apprentice guide that was on the trip with him as well, and his name was Mac. Well, he was very brave because he risked his own life to go and try to help Paul. So he was in a kayak, and so he's paddling the kayak, and he gets up to inches away from Paul's face. And Miraculously, Paul was able to grab a hold of part of that kayak that was inches from his face and hold on strong enough to where Mac pedaled the heck out of there as fast as he could, kind of just towing poor Paul in the back, but he's getting him out of there, thank goodness. So he drags him back to the rock. They pull him up, and Paul's asking, well, what happened to Evans? Where's Evans? Because he didn't see him on the rock anywhere. And then that's when the apprentice guide, Mac, told Paul that Evans didn't make it, and Evans was gone. So it was there on the rock that Paul kind of assessed the situation because he was kind of the leader, the boss, this was his company. So he was trying to figure out, and also he's injured. So he has to decide what we need to do next, basically. And they're kind of looking over Paul and assessing his injuries. Paul's left foot was hurt. One arm was crushed to a pulp, it said, from the elbow down, with most of the skin gone. Sorry, guys, I know that's gross, but that's what happened. It said that Paul had been bit almost 40 times. And he had blood coming out of his mouth, it said, because he had actual internal injuries. It said that one of the bites from the hippo actually severed an artery, but the way it bit down, the angle was just so. It was perfect to where it actually sealed itself again. So even though it bit through, somehow it was able to seal itself back up, because otherwise he should have been dead a long time ago, bleeding out. Miracle again right there. So they loaded Paul. They decided to put him in a canoe. He needed medical attention quickly. So they did that, and they paddled him away. And it said, and one of the sources I found, it said that a hippo actually bumped the canoe several times, but thank goodness it didn't try to attack or do anything crazy. It went off on its own. And Paul says that ride back in the canoe, he had an overwhelming peace come over him that he just cannot explain. He said he wasn't scared. And he said at one point, he just got very extremely sleepy. And he told Ben, who was paddling him back, he said, look, tell my family I love them. I'm not sure I'm going to make it, and he's getting real sleepy. But then Paul decides to fight instead of give in to that sleep. He said the pain was unbearable. It would have been so easy just to give in. He wanted the pain gone, but living and seeing his family meant more, so he fought through it. Well, they made it out of the river, and later they learned that Evans, he must have drowned because he didn't have any bite marks or attacks or anything like that was evident. I think he just got too exhausted trying to fight and get away, and unfortunately he drowned. And Evan's body was found 3 days after that. As far as the rest of the people that were still on the rock, they got rescued as well. A ferry actually went out there and got them off and got them to safety. And poor Paul, he had a trek because he's all injured. He had to do the canoe to safety. Once he's out of the river, poor Paul had an 8-hour drive to get to the nearest hospital, because they're in Africa, right? So he had to endure an 8-hour drive with all those injuries. And it said in the first month, he had several major surgeries just in the first month. For a moment, Paul thought that he would lose all his appendages, both arms, both legs, and, he was depressed about that. But actually, his surgeon not only saved his life that day he was injured, but he also was able to save his legs and arm. And the reason being is the surgeon thought that if he amputates all of these, Paul won't live. It was that extensive. He won't live through it. So he didn't do it. But he did end up amputating one arm. That just had to be done, the one that was just mangled to a pulp. So when Paul awoke in ICU, he was devastated to see that an arm had to be amputated. But at the same time, he was feeling blessed, and he was so thankful too, because the rest of his legs and other arm, they were saved. Well, Paul, got better and better as time went on. He did occupational therapy, and then he eventually got a prosthesis. And he was able to get back to his life. It said that 2 years after Paul's attack, Paul and a team made the longest recorded descent of the Zimbabwe River to date. It was a 3-month-long journey type thing, and they covered over 1,600 miles. And then later on in life, Paul, he moved to the U.S. and he ended up getting married. That's that. But can you imagine? Attacked 3 times by a hippo. That's terrifying. But I will say it would be cool to go on a safari one day. I think that would be fun, but I don't know about the canoe type thing. I don't even know if they still do that because of this happening, the canoe safaris, but maybe they do. I'm not sure. But anyways, what did you think of that, guys? Let me know in the comments. And then also, if you don't mind, just hitting that like and subscribe if you enjoy these stories. That helps me and also makes me really happy. I feel like I don't know, if from time to time you just need that extra oomph to know that, hey, other people are getting something out of these stories. So anyway, love you guys. Thank you guys. You're amazing. And that's that. So I will see you guys for the next one. Thank you.